Hello friends and happy Easter. Let's do a video of the missing years of Jesus's life based on the knowledge from Dolores Cannon and her amazing book, Jesus and the Essenes. Now this is going to fill in a bunch of gaps for you, especially if you get your data from the Bible, because they've conveniently left out like 18 years of Jesus's life. And these are the most important years. And I'll tell you what he was doing in those 2 decades. And it wasn't just carpentry work in Jerusalem, okay? So according to Dolores Cannon's channeled work, he was traveling the world, becoming basically a Jedi master. And this is incredible. And this is why they ultimately crucified him, because he taught people a very important thing that the authorities don't want you to know. We'll get to that in a minute. So the Essenes were this group of people that lived by the Dead Sea, and they were preserving this lost esoteric knowledge of humanity. They eventually got put into the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have today. The most amazing discovery that humans have ever made, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that has been conveniently kind of, swept under the rug. Very bizarre. But anyways, the Dead Sea Scrolls were amazing. The Essenes are who did that. Now, Jesus lived with and studied with the Essenes for a long time. The Essenes were an offshoot of the mystery school. So zoom out real quick. We had the Atlantis civilization, the great Atlantis civilization, and it fell during the Great Deluge, the big cataclysm that wiped out most of the world. But there were survivors, and these survivors of the Atlantean civilization carried this esoteric knowledge, this amazing knowledge of our origin, humans' place in the cosmos, like our abilities and powers and spiritual, essence and all this kind of stuff was preserved in these secret libraries, these Atlantean libraries. But it was also passed down word of mouth wise through these traditions and these teachings in something called mystery schools. This goes all the way back to the Egyptian days. There's actually evidence that Mary Magdalene was a Egyptian priestess who studied in the mystery schools there. That went to Pythagoras and the Greek mystery schools. They kept passing this down into like the Rosicrucians, and it's still preserved today. So this esoteric knowledge, this amazing information, is being suppressed from the average person because the authorities don't want people to know how powerful they are. So these mystery schools keep this information alive. Well, Jesus, in these missing years of his life, was traveling the world, learning all of this mystery school information from going to the different mystery schools around the world with his rich uncle, Joseph of Arimathea. So he was one of the richest people on earth, and he had all these connections, and he took Jesus from, his teenage years and his 20s all around the world, studying with shamans and, Buddhists and all of these, spiritual and religious leaders around the world, studying and learning about spirituality and consciousness and connection to source and, our abilities and healing and telepathy and, all the amazing, psi abilities that we have. He was learning all this stuff. And so he was going around the world learning from the masters. And then when he came back to Jerusalem, around age 30, and that's when the Bible picks up conveniently. They leave all that out. And, he was training hard. He didn't just have all this stuff, even though people that knew him said that he was extremely gifted and talented and very smart and charismatic, and he learned everything very quick. He was like the top Jedi in Jedi school. He still had to learn all this stuff. He traveled around the world and he trained and he learned all this stuff. And he came back to Jerusalem, and he wanted to take everything that he had learned and create this new, he didn't want to call it a religion, and he didn't want to create churches, but he wanted to create these like learning centers, like these mystery schools. And he just called his teachings the way. It wasn't a religion, it was just the way, okay? And, they were going to Glastonbury, him and his uncle, and they had actually began building what was going to turn out to be the very first Christian church. But Jesus actually helped build that, and they were going to build this building, and it was going to be the center for knowledge and education where people came. Instead of it being like a pastor giving a sermon, everyone would sit around in a circle and just share information one person at a time. And it was just these learning centers based on the mystery schools. This is what Jesus wanted to create. And it was just going to be called the way. Well, when he came back to Jerusalem, he saw how everything was going. And he saw that they were basically, commercializing worship. And he went to the church, or where they called it temple, and he saw that they were selling these sacrificial lambs for a lot of money to these poor people and telling them, they had to do this and this and this and setting all these rules in place and all this. And he was like, man, this is not cool what y'all are doing. So that's when the famous flipping of the tables and all that stuff, eventually, or soon after that, the same week, he was arrested by the Roman authorities and he was crucified. So Jesus didn't necessarily die for our sins. He died because he traveled the world and he saw the light and the love and he saw the way. And then when he came back, he saw how everything was being just twisted and distorted and everyone was being lied to, and he got mad. He got really mad, and his anger came out, and he started destroying the place. And they were like, man, we can't have this guy. He's too powerful. He's too smart. He has too much knowledge. He was going around like performing miracles by showing people that they don't need authority. They don't need, church. They don't need anything. They have the power to heal. They have the power to connect. They have the power to obtain wisdom and knowledge. And he realized that he was so smart and the people he's talking to were very uneducated. So he came up with parables, and he used nature, and he started using like metaphors and telling stories. That's why most of the parables and the stories in the Bible are very symbolic. They're not very specific. They're very vague, because the people he's talking to weren't near as educated as him. So he had to break it down and simplify everything into these parables. And that's why people liked him. They're like, man, I like this guy. I can understand him. He's actually, for the first time in my life, telling me who I am as a person and what my abilities are. And he was showing people how they can heal with the palm of their hand and all these amazing things. And so everyone loved him. And then the authorities were like, oh, we have a problem on our hands. Like, this dude is legit, So that was the end of him, right? Well, then his uncle, went back to Glastonbury and, with the Druids, and they ended up creating the first Christian church. This is not what the Bible tells you. This is not what, historians tell you. They tell you all this happened hundreds of years later, and in Rome, and the first pope and all that. Well, that's when Catholicism was born. But the first Christian church that was actually set forth by Joseph and Jesus came in Glastonbury, and they had started building this in Jesus' lifetime. He wanted to take all of the knowledge, all the different religions and spiritualities and ways of thinking and ways of living and all that stuff, and cobble it together, find this like perfect mashup of everything. And with all the mystery schools teachings from decades and decades and centuries, going back to Atlantis and Egyptians and Greek and Roman, and going, over into Asia and studying with, the Hindus, and just studying with everybody. He wanted to create this perfect, what he called the way, and just teach love and light, and that you are powerful. You don't need authorities. You don't need a pastor. You don't need even God. Like, God is within you, Jesus was never like, I'm the Son of God, bow to me. That was all written in the Bible hundreds of years later by people that never met him a day in their life. Jesus as a person, was a human. He was an amazing, talented, powerful human, but he was a human, and he taught people, guess what? I'm amazing and I'm powerful, but so are you, and I'll show you the way. This is why they crucified him. So on this day, on Easter, remember who Jesus was and what Jesus was teaching, that you are powerful and you don't need anything outside of you. Everything, including God, is within you. That's what Jesus would tell you if he was right here. Or at least that's what I think. Let me know what you think. Have a beautiful day, my friends.